Welcome to the Modern Pet Retailer, where independent pet retailers come together to run better businesses, make smarter decisions, and stop leaving money on the table. Welcome, everybody, to the Modern Pet Retailer. Last week, we were discussing with Dave how to build processes and evaluate your processes inside of your business. And the week prior, we were talking about how to build the SOPs, the step-by-step guides to those processes. None of these things matter if you still are getting called every day to run things, or you're inside your operations every day to run these things. The goal is for us to put these in place so the business relies on one person or you less. So that's the topic we're covering today, is how to reduce your store's owner dependency so you can get outside of your business and start working more on the operations and making it more of an efficient engine. Most of what we're talking today is coming from a book called E-Myth by Michael Gerber. The E-Myth, the premise is most people who start small businesses are not entrepreneurs first. They're hobbyists, what they call technicians, who basically had an entrepreneurial seizure. They were good at their work, whether they worked at a pet store before and they wanted to buy one and run one. They didn't like the area's offerings that you live in, and you're like, I could start something better because I care for pets or something like that. But with that, they assumed that if you knew how to take care of pets, what products to bring in, you knew how to run a business. And those two skills are completely different. Michael Gerber says every business owner is actually three people in one. You have the entrepreneur, you have the manager, and you have the technician. A typical small business owner is 70% technician, so that hobbyist or the person that was passionate about the topic, 20% manager, and 10% entrepreneur, which means most of us are spending most of our time doing things in operations instead of building on our businesses. If your business can't survive a week without you, you do not own a business. You own a job, and a job you cannot leave is a very expensive trap. Today, Dave is going to walk us through what it actually looks like to shift the balance, what not to do, how to hand things off correctly, and how to measure whether the handoff worked, and what to do with the freedom once you have it, because it's very easy once you start handing things off to pick up the incorrect tasks and not work on the things that you need to work on. So while we're talking today, I want you to think about, if you could get just 8 hours a week of your life back, what could you be doing with that 8 hours? Maybe it's not inside your business. Maybe you could just be having dinner with your spouse, your kids, or your furry family members. Or you could get back to a hobby that you've given up since you started running this business. Whatever that is for you, I want you to hold on to that, because that's going to be the driver and what makes you want to take action on these things. So, Dave, diving in, let's quickly introduce E-Myth. I know it's a book that you absolutely love, and it's definitely been a game changer for me. But the E-Myth framework, for anyone who has not read the book, can you walk us through the three roles and what most independent retailers get trapped in as in the technician role?
Yeah, actually, the Michael Gerber's E-Myth, I think, is probably close to 45 years old, and I ran into it well over 20 years ago. And just as a high-level overview, it is both a very simple book, but very deep. And it's not like a deep business book. It's actually pretty straightforward, but it has so many good insights about total operations and the way you laid it out, Tiff, with the three different personalities within the one person. The entrepreneur is the visionary. That's the sort of the future oriented individual who is always thinking about the way things could be and what opportunities are out there. And they can see the risks too, but they're looking ahead, they're assessing, they're looking at the business and the business landscape from a high level, just a very outside looking. The manager is really the one who organizes the systems, organizes, hiring employees and making sure things run on time, trains run on time, and that the products are ordered, things are done, anything that has to, they're scheduling, right? They're making sure that all of the organization in the business is laid out in such a way that what has to get done gets done. And the technician is really the doer. And it's funny, you talk about how all people have all of these within us. just at different levels, and how you said we are roughly 70% technician when we start, and we have to, it's a comfortable place, right? Because being the technician is what got us where we are, because we can do stuff well. We understand the products. We can help the customers. We, maybe we're a groomer and we could do the grooming. We're doing the actual job that delivers the service or product. And it feels comfortable because we've become an expert in that, and we become an expert in the processes. And we spent a lot of time there, and it's probably stuff that we enjoy. And the problem is, because it's easy, because it's comfortable, we tend to get stuck in the technician role, right? We start to think things like, oh, I can't really delegate because I do it better than them, right? I've been doing it for 20 years and I just hired someone. Well, of course, you're going to have more experience and you're going to have more knowledge and you're going to do a better job helping the customer, picking the right products. Problem is, if you stay there because it's comfortable, and if you say, well, I can do it better than other people, all your actually your comment, right? You have a job that you can't get out of, right? Which is the worst place to be. So take this as an overview, is like, we are not one of these, we are all of these, just at different percentages at different times of our career. We're almost all starting as technicians because we're learning to do the stuff, and then we move up to manager because we have to, and hopefully we move up to entrepreneur, because that's going to be the most valuable place to be in this way of thinking. And just one other note is, I often think that the E-Myth is probably one of the books that I've gifted most to other people, just because if you're running a business, it is such a good starting point and such a good way to view operations of a business. But the book itself is actually like two books. It's a story book that walks you through Michael Gerber's process with a narrative about a business and a person who runs their business. But it's also a well documented guide to get where you want to go, which is a well documented, well systematized business that you're not handcuffed to for the rest of your life. So, great book.
Yeah, you're definitely right about the readability of it, because I probably took 3 years worth of business courses in college, and I learned more in this one small book than I feel like I learned across those 3 years. It just makes it so consumable, and at a level that it's very easy. Even if you didn't run a business and you were going to get into it and you had no knowledge, you could read this and understand the process. I think a lot of people listening will recognize themselves immediately, whether they kind of relate to the technician or maybe a little bit of more the manager side if they're that part of their business, and understand that some of the entrepreneurial tasks might be the ones that they don't really like to do because they gravitate towards the technician role. Dave, what do you think people notice when they are too deep in the technician role?
It, and it's interesting the way you frame that. When you're stuck in the technician role, they might not notice anything at all, because they're like, it's almost like the comment to your nose to the grindstone, right? You're just doing the work, right? And if you are going to notice anything, you're going to notice that the things that you're uncomfortable doing, maybe it is parts of management, maybe it is parts of administrative back office work, or maybe it is, planning and projecting. What you're going to notice, those things that are most important to the growing of the business, to the ease of operating the business, are falling through the cracks. That's really what's happening. Is you might notice that as you stay in the technician role and you have more stuff to do, if you're fortunate, your business is growing because you're good at your job, then you're juggling more balls, right? You haven't built the systems, you haven't planned for the future. You're just taking on another job, another job, another job. And that's the good fortune of being successful and growing your business. But if you don't learn to get out of the technician role, you're going to start dropping those balls that you're juggling. And I think that's what you're probably going to start to notice first. You know, everything comes back to you because you're the point person. Any questions, any decisions. Um, you just haven't made your system so that your other employees can do that. Maybe you need to take a day off, and stuff doesn't work, and they're calling you, or just it gets dropped, and no one knows what to do if you're not there to actually do it. And again, like, the questions are the biggest thing, I think, is if you have employees coming to you for things that you feel like they should know, uh, or you just haven't given them the tools to work through the answers and to help the customers in the way that you would, maybe do ordering, or it doesn't matter what it is. If you haven't set them up for success, you're just going to notice those things are not done as well. They do fall through the cracks, or they just get dropped, or again, they call you, right? So that's kind of like where what you're going to see when you live in the day to day of being the point person on every task on the list, helping the customers, doing the ordering, cleaning the bathrooms. You own it all. And if you haven't built the systems, then you're going to get stuck there.
Yeah, I think an important thing to note is the technician's not necessarily the enemy. It's like Dave said, when you're juggling all those roles and those balls, it's when everything gets crowded out, the manager role, the entrepreneur role, those tasks that are important to progress the business get crowded out essentially. Because then the store is limited to by what one person can personally do and personally be present for. So that's the ceiling that I think a lot of people hit when they have those successes. I want you to think, where do you honestly spend most of your time? Is it doing work? Are you on the sales floor doing tasks and taking care of customers and all of that? Or is it organizing the work or building the business? Think about where you're at in your journey and where you want to be. But we have to shift our mindsets. We have to shift from being a technician, and that can be difficult because this is your baby. This is what you built. You blood, sweat, and tears in this thing. And before we get into how you can shift, Dave, why do you think it is so hard for owners to emotionally let go of the reins?
I think it might not be described this way by oneself, but I think part of it is ego, right? We have this sense of ownership because it's our baby. We grew it, we built it, we made the decision to start it, or entered into the business with an intention to do something that you enjoyed. And when you get good at things, and then it ultimately becomes ego or fear. And fear that if you let go, it's not going to get done as well, or ego, I'm the one who is the best one to do this. And I've always looked at business, and hey, we're in pet retail, and there's so many good things about this industry. It's very solid, it's recession resistant. But if you take a step up into manager, up into entrepreneur, really the back end of business is business, right? And that's the skill that we should be developing. Um, we've already become a good technician, and we want to become good at these other things, right? We don't want to just be the best technician. We have to begin to delegate those, because we need more people to help our customers, because we want to grow our business. So we have to kind of like step up that ladder to the next level, so that we can confidently have staff that takes care of that part of the business. So I think the biggest part is either mindset. I think would be either a little bit of fear or a little bit of ego wrapped around something we've done for a long time.
The goal is not to remove yourself from the business entirely. It's just to make your involvement optional rather than mandatory. There's a big difference between choosing to be on the floor and then having to be on the floor. So let's talk about the mistakes first, because most of us made a lot of these mistakes probably when they tried to delegate something. But Dave, what are the most common ways delegation goes wrong in a small retail business?
Bad delegation is a negative reinforcement loop. So when we hastily hand something off, then it's done poorly. Then we say to ourselves, "Oh, I knew they wouldn't be able to do that well. I have to do it, right? So there's a few things going on with delegation that often makes it fail. And one of the things that you're doing jobs that you like and you get really good at jobs that you like. So we want to hand off things that we don't like, you know? And if we're not intimately involved in that thing we don't like, we're not going to train it well because we don't like it. We have to kind of look at it very neutral, refine the job, then be able to teach it and hand it off. But that's not necessarily the first thing we should be delegating. We shouldn't necessarily be delegating just those things we don't like because we're more likely to do that wrong, to delegate that wrong. Um, because you don't like them, they're just, we're avoiding the deep understanding, which has to be part of our system and part of our delegation. This goes back, I think we talked about either Einstein or Richard Feynman, who is like, if you cannot describe something well, you don't understand it well enough. And Gerber would say that as well. If you can't clearly articulate a task, you don't really understand it and you're not quite ready to delegate it. So delegation is something that you have to understand each process, each system intimately, then document it. And we've talked about the SOPs and documentation. It just means you need to understand the job. So if you're just trying to throw stuff away that you don't like, and you're like, hey, go over and do that thing, almost certainly you're going to fail. And that's that negative reinforcement loop that you just prove to yourself that no one else can do it because they failed at it. But they didn't fail because they failed. They're not good at it. They failed because you didn't give them the tools that they needed. You didn't give them the training they needed, the system that they needed in order to do it well, or the time to learn. Because if you do something for a year, you're going to get pretty good at it. And then you ask someone on day one to just replicate that job, they're going to be bad at it. It's inherently something we have to be bad first. We have to fail first, and we have to be willing to do that. So, really, delegation comes down to you should be looking at those jobs that you can articulate well and that mostly take your time, energy, or money that you can share with other people so that they can take up those tasks. It's going to free up your mental bandwidth. It's going to free up your time and free up your energy to focus on those things that are ultimately going to be more important to your business.
Yeah, and when I think about one of the tasks that I absolutely hated doing when I first started was the social media side of marketing. Social media just feels like a trap that's like, well, once you're in it, you doom scroll to get ideas, or it just sucks you in down a bunch of rabbit holes, especially in the pet industry. Because if you're on a couple different pet business pages, you'll get sucked down to which food's doing what and what company's doing what. And it's just like a nightmare to keep yourself on task, one. And then I am not first and foremost a creative person. So creating the graphics or the infographics was just not my favorite. But what I did like about it is understanding the marketing side of it. So you encouraged me was like, before I hand this off, before I try to hand this off, put these systems in place, make it so easy that anybody can do it. And that involved probably a year of just committing to learning social media marketing, whether it was building creatives or understanding the ads and everything before I could feel like I could hand it off. Because otherwise, I felt like I was just pawning it off because I didn't like it. But now that we have a system in place and the person that's currently running it is doing such a great job because her first skill is creative. She can look at a design and make it look aesthetically pleasing without any thought. What she didn't have was the stuff that I liked was the marketing side of it, the how to build copy that converts and all of that. So delegating things you hate might not necessarily be a bad thing, but like Dave said, you want to be completely educated on the topic so that you can hand it off properly.
Yeah, and on a note on that specific, because I think that's a great example, is because you spent the time doing it yourself and building the system and going deep on social media, you were able to not only identify best places to focus, but also creating a Braxton specific roadmap. You know, what should they look like? What should the headlines look like? All of the things that are important, that if you were, and the funny thing is, like, we're not just talking delegating to internal employees. So many people just want to take stuff off their plate that they're going to hire a social media manager who's outside of the business. And that can work, but that ultimately becomes way more costly, and you still have to manage it. So going deep and understanding first, I think, is always the best first step. And I think that, like you said in that example, that works so well, to go deep, kind of do the stuff yourself, figure out exactly what you want to do, and then you can intelligently hand it off with the right amount of information to make it repeatable and even improvable, I guess, right? You have a good starting point.
Yeah, and of those mistakes, Dave, the ones you kind of mentioned, which of those is the most expensive one when it goes wrong in a retail small business?
I think the one of the ones that can go wrong is probably also our biggest fear, which is diluting the brand and the goodwill that you've built through your hard work and connection with customers. And this is where you can establish your rigid guidelines, what to do and what not to do, and just creating those systems and frameworks that allow someone else to do the job very well. So I think that's one of the biggest ones that are, you're right to be concerned about. Fear is not the right way to approach it, but concern is. So how do you establish the guardrails and the guidelines in order to have them? And that's, again, just a social media example, but other things is incomplete. Like, if we're not teaching well and we hand things off, those things that we didn't teach might not get done. They might get done wrong. But again, this goes back to disrupting your customer goodwill and upsetting customers with problems. And I think that's going to be one of the places where we're going to have the biggest problem if we don't take delegation seriously and if we don't do it right.
Yeah, and I would think also having that kind of follow-up, the check-ins, the KPIs that you create to make sure that things are going well, because it's like you feel like you've got them trained, and then you don't check in with them later. They're doing a task that might be incorrect, and you're paying for them to do it incorrectly, and they start branching off in the wrong direction, so definitely a great point about the training and delegation.
Yeah, and I think you're right as far as like that. It's not one and done, like we were talking about the SOPs before. Is these check-ins are important because our system's not ever going to be perfect, and the world changes around us. So we just want to move towards complete, and it's always going to be refined. So these check-ins are both good for our systems as we develop them, and they're imperative to our employees as we teach them how to do the tasks through the systems and through the delegation. So I mean, that's a really good point. Is I always consider this, it's never a closed loop. We're never done. The training is never done. It's, all of these skills are perishable and the information is perishable. It gets stale over time. Systems change, our point of sale systems change, products change. So this check-in that you just mentioned is absolutely critical to making sure both we're doing the training properly, the employees are getting good reinforcement that we're doing it right, we're telling them they're doing it right, or we're correcting where they're going wrong in a fairly fast feedback loop, so that we're satisfied and employees are happy because they're getting the information they need to do it right.
So you're probably already thinking of a task that you would absolutely love to delegate, love to get off your plate, but you might be thinking it's too important to the business. It's too important that I remain the sole person on this, whether that's scheduling employees, maybe it's like the hiring process or something like that. Something that feels like if you handed it off, it might be just too much. Dave, for someone who has never really delegated anything, maybe significant, where do they start? Because the tendency is either to hand off nothing or try to hand off way too much at once.
The most recurring tasks, so things that are happening on a very consistent basis, I think is a good place to do it because we should be very familiar with it. right? And it's also a place that costs a lot of time. Is a starting point is taking at least moderately simple but high volume task that will earn back your time and be easier to train because it's something that you do all the time, right? We talked about SOPs and how to get the right information out of the SOP. So really what we're doing when we're doing the SOPs and doing the delegation and training is we're building a framework like a franchise. And if you think about how usually if you say McDonald's, everybody's like, well, that's a terrible restaurant, or whatever you think about McDonald's. What they absolutely have and do well is systems, right? So if you get a burger in New York, it's going to be the same type of burger that you get in California, that you get in Texas, even that you get around the world, Canada, Mexico, and Europe and everywhere else. So when you think about franchise, it's not about whether the franchise business you're thinking is good or bad. The franchise that we're looking at is the system that is built and the documentation. Actually, as a young person, I worked at McDonald's, and I can comment affirmatively that their training system and their documentation is nailed down. I mean, it is super clean. You know, yeah, there's a system for mopping the front of house, right? There's a system for doing cleaning the bathrooms. There's a system for cooking a burger, and everything is documented well, and then basically one sheeted. So like you're gonna have a manager or trainer sit with you and walk you through, and all the sort of standards of how you teach somebody is they show you, then you do it, and they watch you and they correct you, and then you start to do it on your own. And like we were just talking about the feedback loops and the training check-ins, like all of these things exist, and that's the way we want to look at it is as we learn to delegate well, think about businesses that have usually um, high numbers of locations, right? Your Starbucks, your fast food, like your McDonald's. And whether or not you like the business is irrelevant. Look at their systems and think about, is it repeatable no matter which one you go into? And that's what we're looking for. Is we're looking for repeatable standards that can be replicated by any number of people, right? It's you bring someone in on day one and you give them the training and you set your expectations and you do your check-ins, and now you have another staff member that can do jobs XYZ. This is, I think, the way that you want to look at proper delegation is like a franchise system.
Yeah, McDonald's is obviously one of the best examples, and if you haven't seen Founders, I think is the movie, literally gives you an inside scoop of how they built those processes and systems, and I could probably walk into a McDonald's today and run it within maybe 2 days just because they have those things in place, and that's how easy you want it to be with inside your own business. You want to be able to hire a manager, and they have everything they need in place. When I was hired 5 years ago, I had a lot of the tools that the previous person I was successing didn't have. They were able to learn from their mistakes and be like, "Hey, let's make this easier on the next person," which would happen to be me. And I could walk in and be successful pretty quickly.
When you talk about starting here, and I think your entry, it was known that you were going to be manager, but your entry point was actually front staff. And I think this is really valuable sort of way to think is you didn't know the business, you didn't know our business, but the purpose was to experience every part of the business as the average employee experiences it. And I think this is a really good way to kind of think as an owner and a manager is like you have to do the jobs. If you already have employees and you're still like either not satisfied or you don't have your systems in place, is take the time to do the job and learn it from the people who do it most often before you start to systematize and then sort of almost like retrain, redelegate, taking the best practices of your best employees. And I thought that was a great way for you to enter into the business, learning the systems from the position that they were oriented towards versus just coming in, sitting in an office, and then reading about the systems and then trying to teach them without ever having done them. So I think that's a really good way for us to look at every new system, is to get the details from the people that do it most often, experience the job firsthand. And this is something else that can be really good at revisiting the space that we need to refine, improve, and delegate.
Yeah, I do really appreciate the way we did that just because, one, I came with the mindset of what was gonna be the end result, and I could look at I was like, "Okay, here's some gaps that I felt like just were missing." I was looking at it through a different lens than just a new hire retail staff member. So jumping back, walk us through what good delegation actually looks like from start to finish, because I think a lot of people think delegation is just telling somebody what to do.
We've talked a lot about documentation and systems and the SOPs, and that is all part of the delegation, because we're Gerber also talks about everything in the business is like a position, right? There's a role, and it's not a person. Like, oh, John does this stuff. Well, that's great. Well, it's not really John, it's clerk, right? And there's manager. Tiff is the manager. Okay, but it's the tasks are management tasks, right? So we want to think about roles, and that's basically how the SOPs get made. That's how the documentations. And one of the most important things is the standards. And this, we talked about this in the SOPs, the intent. What is it we want to get done? What outcomes do we want? And what standards do we accept for those outcomes? And I think I had mentioned it before. I don't recall who said it, but it's really not like the standards are not what are written. The standards are what are tolerated. So this has to do with training, right? How do we, when we train someone and we look at the data loop, the check-ins, if we tolerate sloppiness, no matter what our standard is set to, we're expecting sloppiness, right? So you have to make sure that your training is good, your check-ins are good. So all of these processes are in place before we ask someone to do the job. As we said, like we're specifically doing it to create the system. But once your systems are in place and you're just delegating, it's about the system, the documentation, the expectations, and then the training, right? So we're doing repeated training. We're showing, we're allowing them to do it while we watch. We're over their shoulder. We're giving them quick feedback. Then we're getting back to the check-ins, and we're just working through this cycle. So the standards should include, what does this look like when it's done properly, actually, right? Not just finished, but how is it done when we're happy with the end result? So if things don't go well, how do they, if they can't do it themselves, we also have to give them an easy out, because there are some personalities that will just kind of like, it's done, it's fine, it's close enough. But we want to make sure that they have a reasonable way to escalate a process that they're uncertain about. And this will be especially true early in the training, but it should be culturally established that you're open to questions in the business so that things don't get buried. Oftentimes, even as much as we try to have good systems in place, things still happen. Just the other day, an employee said to me, "Oh, we have to come in and adjust the thermostat every morning." I had changed the thermostat like a couple of months ago and realized it wasn't programmed. I'm like, well, where's that information? You know, I didn't get the information. They didn't come to me. They didn't escalate it. They just kind of like, oh, we'll just adjust it every morning when we come in. So that's an example of, I didn't give them the tools, although we do have the tools for communication. In that particular job, it didn't come to mind that they should escalate that in order to get it fixed so they would never have to do it again. So those are kind of the steps to make sure that we're building good delegation. and ensuring that we're building consistency into the process.
So different tasks have range of complexity, how close they are to the business and how important they are, or simplicity and recurring tasks. Dave, how long does it actually take to properly delegate something if it's important?
Well, again, the ones that we talked about that might be good first ones should be simple tasks that are relatively common, and if they're well documented and they're happening so that your new employee that you're delegating to can get a lot of reps in, you should you should know within, I don't know, half dozen reps, which could be a couple of days, right? And that's the shadowing and showing and watching and getting that feedback loop. As complexity increases, the time should be expected to increase. Or you can chunk a complex task into multiple subtasks and teach them one at a time in short loops. But I could easily see a task that's complex, different things for receiving or ordering, that could take several weeks to basically complete the whole task, even if you're chunking it down, right? So that could be a month in order, maybe 2 months in order to have the confidence that they're going to be able to repeat the task successfully on their own without issue. Or again, only like edge cases that they have to escalate, but mostly being able to run, the 90+% processing without issue once you get that month or 2 months underneath your belt with complex tasks. And it's important to remember that the time spent, when you're training someone, you're paying for two people to do one job. And that's expensive both in time and money, but it is absolutely an investment because I don't think it was Gerber, but sort of a lot of this management idea is what's the value of time and whose time is more valuable. If you're going to hire a front staff for $15 an hour, uh, but your time is worth more than that, you need to free your time, right? You need to get that time back, so that taking the time to do the training properly so that we know that we can get a consistent result is an investment, and it is absolutely worth doing that. And if we don't do it, it goes back to what I had said before, is like failure is a self-reinforcing loop. We don't spend the time, we don't do the training properly, new employee fails, and then we stand back and go, see, I have to do it myself. And then, you live in a smaller world and you end up doing sort of all the jobs yourself without help. So it's important to take your time, the proper amount of time for the job and the expectation of that job. So simple tasks, a couple of days, complex tasks, think multiple weeks.
Yeah, I could definitely see how the fact that you already don't have enough time and you have to now take the time to train somebody to delegate this task can make it, like you said, that feedback loop of, well, they didn't learn it. They didn't take it in. Well, did I actually give it the actual amount of right time because I feel so rushed in my regular schedule to get things done because I have all these other tasks piling up behind me. I need to get all these other tasks off of my plate so that I actually have time to breathe and train on the next best thing. You've talked about abdicating with me quite a bit because I think it was something I struggled with when I first started with the delegation process. What is the difference between delegating something and abdicating something?
This kind of goes back to where we started and the idea that we often want to just take the tasks that we don't like off of our plate. And abdication is basically, yeah, you hand it off, but you don't teach it and you don't pay attention to it and you don't look for your KPIs and your feedback loops, right? So delegation is training with a clear standard and expectation of what's going to occur and taking the time to continue to train until we get that standard and then allowing the employee to own the job, right? So we've taken the time to do all that training to prepare to have the SOPs and then the feedback loop and check-ins so that the employee has confidence, and that the feedback loop, those check-ins are there to ensure that there's ongoing standard. And that's really good delegation. Abdication is basically just turfing something. It's like, I don't want to do this, you do it. And that's the end of the conversation. And abdication almost always ends in failure, even if you're giving it to a professional. And my example earlier with the social media manager is, if all you do is look through the internet, find a social media manager, give them a call, hire them, pay them a check, and then just pay your $500 a month or whatever you're doing, you're probably not going to be happy, right? A good outsider, a good expert will not let you do that. They will have the conversations, they'll have the meetings, they'll drag out of you all of the information they need to do it well. But a bad expert will just take your money and be like, we'll do social media. And they're doing their job, right? But unless you articulated absolutely and certainly clearly what you wanted, the outcomes you wanted, you've just abdicated that. You're just like, all right, please do this because I don't want to do it and I'll pay you to do it. And you think everything will be great, but you're going to be disappointed because it's not going to work unless you can give them absolutely clear guidelines, absolutely good training, and expectations. So it's dangerous, but it's easy. So it's deceptive because we want to do it and we think we're delegating, but it's just dangerous because we rarely get the outcome that we originally wanted.
So it sounds like good delegation requires more of your attention upfront in the short term, and then the payoff is the long term when the task runs basically without you. There's no shortcut through the front end of the investment, though. So you have to take the time to teach the person to build the SOPs up front. Now, to avoid the abdication and avoid within your four walls, we have to build the check in process and the KPI process, which is your key performance indicators. Once you have those in place and you know what to track, it's easy for the person you delegated it to know if it's being done correctly, basically. So, Dave, once you've handed something off, how do you know it's being done correctly without being in the room for every shift? How do you build measurable standards around the delegated task?
The KPIs, the key performance indicators, whatever you want to call them, if you have to have a concrete measurement that you can point to and say, yeah, done appropriately or done at all. And these are the things that can get delivered. This is the same. Frequency matters, but it's going to be different frequencies for different standards or different jobs. Some things you want to see dashboarded every day might be too often for a lot of things, but at least once a week as your sort of check in. But the numbers are what are going to give you the confidence and certainty that the jobs are getting done properly. That's the biggest thing is we want to be able to measure as we delegate. We want to be able to measure those things that are not done by us, right? Presumably, if we're doing them, we know whether or not it's been done, right? But we can use these at different levels of the business. So we want to be just like the SOPs. We want the standards to be set. We want to be able to have something to point out at the end of the day and say yes or no. And you kind of want it to be a little bit binary, like a yes or no. And some things are going to be a little analog, like a gradual scale, like what are your dollars per week or what are your employee hours against sales dollars. And there's a few different things that are going to float, but you're going to have a range to make sure things are done properly. So picking them, I can't say, okay, these are the exact KPIs that you should have, but there's a few concepts about these numbers. One, they should be easy to access so that they should be easy to understand and easy to access. So basically, if you can measure it, where are the numbers coming from? Are they coming from your point of sale? Are they coming from your accounting software? Or are they coming just from check-ins from your employees. We have task lists that simply have check boxes, yes, no, right? And that's sort of a good binary. Hey, it's done, it's not done. So on just like the other, you know, ease of task, you're probably going to have low threshold KPIs, right? If it's something super easy, checkbox might be sufficient. If you're going to have a very complex task or something that's a little bit more important, then it might be ratios or raw numbers, gross revenue dollars, these types of things, or inventory valuations if you're assessing someone doing the ordering. You want to run through a few examples of what we could do, but that's basically think about the KPI from a high level as it has to be tied to the outcome, and it should be easy to get the number and easy to understand the number. So it's just a super simple but very broad guideline of the types of numbers that you want. Because if you have 100 items on your dashboard, you're not going to read it, you're not going to understand it.
Yeah, the first one that came to my mind, and you mentioned it, is that we have a cleaning task list for our front staff employees. And this kind of works as a check-in process and also a KPI. So every person is assigned to a zone, and that'll cover certain aisles, certain products, certain cleaning tasks. And every shift, they will check yes or no if they got it done. And that's the check-in part, to know that they are saying they completed the task. The next day, our team leads in the morning will go through and rank those zones from 1 to 5 based off of, like, if they found dog messes or if they find products in the wrong area and all these other things, and then I can see that tool on the back end of, like, yes, so and so said they got this completed, but it was done poorly, and it kinda gives me that feedback loop of, like, are they trained properly? Do they know exactly what the task means? I can engage that employee a little bit more specifically. So that's one thing we have in place that makes my job a lot easier to know. One, I can find who the person that was responsible for why this might look good or why it might look bad, and then either coach or commend even if they did a really good job of how things look. Another one is our since we handed off the social media to another employee to manage, some of her KPIs are the different types of content. So like a checkbox of basically an educational piece each week, a video piece each week, and a traffic driver each week. So come visit the store if you want to see this product. Come check out our self washes, like some kind of call to action to get people to the door. So that gives you a nice media balance. And if you're hitting all three of those things, it should lead to the KPI of views, which we try to get a certain amount of views each week on those pieces of content. And we notice that if you don't hit one of those pieces of content, usually the views kind of reflect in that. So it all helps balance. You have your check boxes of the type of content, and then you have the KPI of how many views you like. And it doesn't have to be views. That's just what we notice as a metric of we get people in the store that said, "Hey, I love seeing your content." So that's what we've attributed to at least success when it comes to bringing people through the door is the views and not so much the engagement or the comments or anything like that. Receiving is another example. When we put that process in place and we spent so much time improving that process, we wanted to make sure that it was getting done and completed. Because once we started training and everything, we noticed some fall off on some things or things were taking too long. So we had to put KPIs in place so that we knew how long it would take per dollar amount to receive certain types of inventory. It would take person A an hour to do the same dollar amount as it took person B. So we had to figure out what was going on with person B and why it might be taking longer for the same exact amount of work. So that's another example of how we had to put something in place post build to that we didn't know was going to be a problem until we got done and started pushing people through it.
If I add a few ideas onto the KPIs, is they don't have to be perfect, they have to be flags, right? So your example of receiving of dollars per hour is an analog. It's basically it's close enough to the truth that we can it informs our understanding of whether things were done well or not done well. And so it's not an absolute like, oh, it has to be this, but we know that there's a range that is sort of a best practice range, and that helps us improve systems, improve training if it's outside of that range. So when you're building SPI, KPIs, it doesn't have to be an absolute yes or no, right? It can be a close to or something to watch. And as long as you understand the parameters, the plus or minus of good work, you'll know when it's outside of good work. And that's when you want to take action. So that's what a KPI is. It's just, it's going to throw a flag for you if it's outside of expected range. The other thing about KPIs is, so we don't incent our employees for certain behaviors. They have expectations and they'll get coaching or they'll get fired or they'll get a pat on the back. When you set incentives, so where I'm going is the KPIs, you have to be very, very careful if someone can abuse an incentive, right? So your KPIs don't want to, you want to be careful that what you're reading is sort of average actual work instead of someone working the system, right? So if you're measuring something and the employee knows you're measuring that one thing, they might do the job to the test. So just be very careful what you're measuring or what you're incenting, because we don't want employees just moving towards the incentive, just moving towards the test. We want it to be broad enough to understand if the job is being done well with the outcomes we're looking for. So those two things I just wanted to add is that picking your KPIs they don't have to be perfect. They just have to point the right direction. And we don't necessarily have to tell the employees what we're measuring, but if we do tell the employees, we want to make sure that it can't be abused just to get numbers, because we don't want numbers. We want good performance. The numbers are just there to measure the good performance.
I'm glad you brought that up because of the two examples I started with the task tracker. It was like once they found out that they were getting graded on how well their sections looked, they prioritized those to make sure they put too much attention into it. So we had to dial that back and be like, you have other responsibilities. You have to be at the register. So you have to find that balance. So then we added another metric onto that of just it's what we call the dollar ratio, basically. So you mentioned hours worked per sales. You don't want your cleaning task list to be a superb all fives, and then you have no sales at the register because it's showing you're not balancing your time. We don't judge them on the sales because that's not something that we incentivize, like upselling or encouraging higher ticket values or anything like that, because that leads to a whole nother thing. But it helps balance the other KPI and understand, yes, you're doing a really good job here, but you're also focusing too much on it. And even the social media person, since views are one of her KPIs, at the first start, it was learning which platform gave you the most views, basically, and building the wrong type of content. Because if you build content that's not store driven or it's just funny, but it doesn't necessarily bring people through the door, it's just meant to provide entertainment, that doesn't get us the goal at the end of the day. It doesn't drive people here. It just entertains them, and we're not creators or whatever they call them on like influencers by any means. We're not trying to entertain people. We're trying to educate them and build trust and get them through our doors. So the view count was another KPI that, while very important, we had to find a balance of was the views were the views actually driving people to the store. So thank you for bringing that up because I forgot about literally when you incentivize anything, you get unexpected results, unintended results. So beyond accuracy, how do KPIs help prevent misconduct or catch problems early? Because we could be talking about delegating some tasks that are very important to the business, whether maybe it's something with payroll or something like that. There could be a lot of opportunities for misconduct. How do the KPIs help prevent that?
Yeah, and some of like we were just talking about is making sure the KPI is appropriate to the job and that it's not driving its own behavior. But in general, if you measure it and you communicate that, people will be a lot, they'll focus on it, right? And then if we don't, or if we're not lining them up properly, or if we don't measure it at all, the training, like I said, is perishable. It starts to go away. I would never consider it intentional. I mean, sure, there's bad actors out there, but assuming your hiring's going well and you're hiring good people, and the intention is not that they're going to just be bad or do things wrong intentionally, but they're going to take an easy path, or they're going to do things the way that they like to do them instead of with training. And again, the training is perishable. So it's funny, a friend of mine who's a lawyer with quite a large practice he was complaining to someone else about the intake documentation wasn't being done as he expected. And the conversation basically went around, well, what's your training look like? He said, I've got really good training. We have the documentation. We want it to be done this way. We train it, and it's just not getting done that way. It's like, well, when was the last time you did the training? It's like, oh, kind of crickets. Like, this is perishable. We have to stay on the standards. Otherwise, they will slip. So the measurement is good to revisit. And again, it depends. You don't have to stand over your employee's shoulder. You don't have to measure the KPI every single day for something easy, but you want to revisit both the good stuff and praise them for that to make sure that you're reinforcing those things that you do want. And then the coaching when the standards do slip. So the things that have to do with like money, you probably want to make sure you're checking every single day. And it doesn't have to be you. One of the systems we have, just like the task list for employees check their own task, and then our key holders, our team leads, will check in the morning against the other documents. Just having two separate eyes on something is a good way to measure and to make sure people understand that the data is getting checked. Another thing that I like with KPIs is that it has an audit ability that creates a paper trail. And this is something we talked about receiving earlier. This is something that we'd had to kind of like build into our receiving. So as information goes through the pipeline, we used to like just delete it because it was done and we didn't need it. But we found that it was better if we kept that data instead of deleting it, because it helped us identify when there were errors after the fact. So we could go back and see exactly how things were done. So these sort of like audit trails and paper trails, the KPIs identify, they can identify trends, they can identify individuals who might not be doing the job as expected. So this paper trail that gets built once we start measuring things on a consistent basis, you can have it in a database or a spreadsheet or something where you can track it over time. And the KPI itself is important to understand, but it is only a snapshot. So when you manage it over time, the snapshot becomes a trend and a movement. Those are the things I think about managing the behavior of employees with the KPIs and being able to both praise and coach when the standards are met and exceeded, making sure that you're reinforcing that. And then also when people are slipping a little bit, as they might naturally do over time, you can coach them back up to standard.
These KPIs can just protect you from catching some of these bigger problems. One that popped in my mind while Dave was speaking there was our nail appointments. We book our nail appointments so that the employee can get compensated, and we had to create a process so that when she submitted those, that they were accurate. Because sometimes it would be she thought she submitted it and then she didn't, so she resubmitted it, and that was getting messed up. So we had to put something in place, but it was showing a bigger problem of we needed to improve how she submitted those so that it could be more accurate, and then the checks on the back end. The important thing is a KPI is not surveillance, it's communication. It tells both you and the person who owns the task whether the standard is being met. When it's framed that way, most employees welcome it because it removes the ambiguity about this what success looks like. What does clean look like? What does done look like? So I want you to think about if you have any measurable KPIs in place, are they KPIs that you can make decisions based off of the data that's given to you? Are they KPIs that are actually relevant to the task? And do they cause any kind of adverse effects, any unintentional kind of back end problems? So we've done all the work. We've built the SOPs. We got the KPIs in place. We have somebody trained on how to do it, and we have free time. It's amazing. When you successfully reduce your dependency in the business, what do you actually do with the time? Is the next question. Because I know from my experience, it's easy just to fill it with the wrong things or things that are not productive or literally finding just another task within the business to operate because you feel like if you're not operating in the business, maybe you're not important.
There's an author, his name is Perry Marshall, and yeah, I think he does a pretty good job. His book's name is 80/20 Sales and Marketing. Perry Marshall basically lays it out as, are you doing $10 an hour work, $100 an hour work, or $1,000 an hour work? And we talked about if your front staff is making 15 bucks an hour, that's your $15 an hour work. If you're helping customers, it's not a bad thing to help customers, but that's sort of your, you need your 5 front staff and they're taking care of the jobs. But if you're the one, right, you're not doing your $100 an hour work, you're not doing your $1,000 an hour work, and you think, well, are you ever doing $1,000 an hour work? You bet you are. Anything where what you're doing to earn customers, earn their trust, earn their respect, earn their business over time. And that's exactly the stuff we're talking about. Building these systems and good quality connection and marketing and sales. These things are $1,000 an hour work. When your business can run itself, that's $1,000 an hour work. So the free time that you earn from the basic jobs that you're building, your systems, your SOPs, you're delegating properly, you're tracking, and then someone is doing that well. The most important thing you can do with your time is not more $15 an hour work or $25 an hour work. It is focus on those things that are going to best serve your total business operation. And then you basically move up the ladder. You move to the next level job that you can teach and delegate. And then you get that done and you move up again so that you're not like, oh, I'm done working. I'm just going to go on vacation for 6 months. And hey, if you can do that, God bless you. But if you still want your business to grow and you want your business to be sustainable over a long period of time, take your time off. But really what you're looking for is what's the next best thing you can be doing to build your business and to make sure that everything runs smoothly. These are the places that you'll want to spend your time. And I think it was Gerber that coined the term, stop working in your business and work on your business. So that is the direction that you'll want to choose the next job, right? So what is that? That looks like strategic decisions, relationship development, marketing, growth planning, building the culture, looking for the next hires that you're going to need to grow the business. These are the things that are going to be your high dollar work that really only you can do, those things that you can't delegate because these are core to you, they're core to your business, and whatever plan you put in place, you're building what you want, but you need the time to do that and plan it and execute it at the highest level. So those are the reasons that you're delegating. Those are the reasons that you want that time back, is to be able to spend it on the most important things to improve and grow your business.
As we wrap this topic up, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and say one thing that you're working on that's growing your business right now. And I'll say an example so you have time to think real quick. One thing I'm working on with some of the reclaimed time from some of the things I've delegated is working on our e-commerce website. It's something we don't have up right now, but it's a lot of learning, a lot of hand holding, working with another company, building it. But the potential upside is huge. If I make X amount a year and that potentially could add a $1 million more revenue to our business every year. It's worth putting in the time that I've delegated to the other tasks so that I have the time to work on this type of project. And Dave, what's something you're working on right now?
First one that comes to mind that I've built several systems with our point of sale data to improve our inventory management and carry numbers. So that would be how much inventory do we want to keep on our shelves in order to minimize our inventory dollar carry while not ever running out of the products for our customers to purchase. So that's just data analysis. And what I'm doing is refining that process so that I get more real time data more often. And that's basically building a software system to capture the point of sale data. It'll probably be on a weekly basis, and I'll be able to parse through that to measure weekly sales and understand trends and inventory flow volumes and velocity so that we can make our adjustments to our carry more quickly and more accurately. So for me, that's huge. Like I've always said, is if cash and cash flow is the lifeblood of business, inventory is what produces cash, right? If we have too much, we're weighing ourselves down. If we have too little, we're losing sales because customers are coming in, we don't have product on the shelf. So finding that way, and that improves gross margin. It improves inventory carry dollars. It improves cash flow. So it is a bigger picture thing that will have carry on value for a long time. It's not something ultimately that will be delegated. Well, the job will go from more manual to software, so we'll be delegating to software, right?
Yeah, if you can make your highest paid employee, which is usually the manager of the store, time and job easier, that's just money back in your pocket if they can pick up the tasks. So that is appreciated, one, and then also just good for business. To close, like Gerber's vision for a mature business is one where the owner's presence is a choice rather than the requirement. This is the entrepreneur's role, and you cannot get there while you are still doing everything yourself.
Just want to have a weekly call with a few friends that run other businesses, and it's really good for me to spend out time outside of mentally outside of our business and talk with people that run other businesses. None of them are in the pet industry, but like I said earlier, this episode is I see business as business, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. And to this point about Gerber's vision for mature business, one of the things that we talk often about in this call with my friends is it's best to run a business as if you were going to sell it. And this is where Gerber goes towards. If you read eMyth and if you develop your business around the philosophies in eMyth, you're building a business that is sellable because it's all systems are done. And you literally could walk away, hand the keys over to someone else. And what that means is when you sell a business, you're not just selling it for dollars, you're selling it for a multiple of part of your business, whether it's your earnings or whether it's your gross, depending on who's buying it, how they're going to measure it. And it's not, you don't make the money on, oh, it's going to be 10% more or 20% more. It's typically a multiple. And the multiple is going to be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And can you imagine, if you have, just for raw numbers, $100,000, the difference between a 3x, $300,000, and a 5x, $500,000 is 60% more. And the difference in that multiple is systems. So go through the eMyth, look at Gerber's vision, and really consider how important this is. And if you run your business as if you're going to sell it, whether or not you're ever going to sell it, you'll be building a business that has way more value to yourself, your employees will be happier, your customers will be happier. And hey, if you did have to sell it, you're going to get top dollar because everything is nailed down and no longer dependent on key people because the systems are in place. So that's the way I think of it. Is I absolutely agree with Gerber, and I just take that one more step and say, build it as if you're going to sell it, and the way to do that is put all these into play.
So this week, audit your business through the E-Myth lens. Take time the entire week, just document and journal what you're spending your time on and how it's split between technician, the manager, or the entrepreneurial time. If you need help with this, after you get this journaled, we have a owner dependency calculator on our website, and I'll link it in the show notes for you. You can plug those figures in and find out how much of your time is actually being spent on tasks that could be delegated and how much money that's costing you in the end. And then that calculator will also help you identify the 3 highest time costs that you could potentially delegate with some SOPs and some proper training, and just pick one of those things. Document it, train it, define what the KPI is, define the check-in process and cadence, and give it some time before you judge whether it's working. And when you do free up this time, use the time intentionally. Use the time on revenue generating projects, on what Dave was talking about, like cost reduction projects, time reduction projects, things that will help move your business into the next phase. Gerber's fatal assumption is that being good at the technical work means you can run a business doing that technical work. Every task you successfully delegate is one more step toward the store and the life that you actually started this whole thing for. Thank you again, Dave, for sharing your wisdom with us. Next week, we are closing out the store operations and systems kind of conversation and discussion with the daily routines and checklists that create consistency. We're going to give you as many examples as we can about all the different checklists we have that you can implement, the things you might not be thinking about. We'll see you guys next week.